DeBron's supporting cast.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all day every day today. We're talking about some of the most important positions that we want to see recruited in the 2026 cycle. And then outside of that, it's a lot of wide receiver talk today. Penn State wide receiver Omari Evans is going to be coming in on an official visit. And we just want to take some time and talk about Demond Williams' receiving corps, because this is a really talented group. Let's say that right now. Let's get that straight. This is a very, very talented group of guys, high school rankings, what we've seen on film, some of the guys that are already in the room, but extremely inexperienced.
And that's the issue is you have, let's probably start with the top. There's the headliner in Denzel Boston. Good. You have your one. So Demond, without a doubt, has a one receiver next year. But then what else does he have? That's basically what we're here to talk about, because you look at it, it's Rashid Williams, Audric Harris, potentially Omari Evans. But then you look at the further down that list goes, and it's like, where's the veteran presence? Aside from Denzel, you have Kevin Green, who I think that's the key for me, because if Kevin Green was healthy this past year, we would be able to go in with 25 saying, hey, he's got two solid receivers. And to be clear, it's not that I don't think Kevin Green is solid. Also saw him at the basketball game on Wednesday night. Shout out to him. But with that being said, looked healthy. Looks like he's going to be good to go. He's on a redemption tour. Got that story up on Athlon Sports. But I think that's the missing link. Is if you can have somebody in the slot, similarly to how Giles ended up emerging as a senior this past year, leading the team in catches, probably would have had more touchdowns, I think, with Demond, if we're being honest. No shot to Will. I just think the offense was more structured in that kind of style. And in that vein, I think Kevin Green Jr. could be a guy that thrives in the slot, no matter if it's Rashid or Audric on the outside.
So I like where you're going with that, because Kevin Green is somebody who you and I throughout spring practice, just fall camp. He was somebody who was at it at the end of spring practice. When we saw him during fall camp, before he ended up getting hurt, which caused him to miss basically the entire season, he was somebody who was making a lot of plays for Demond Williams. He was a guy who, kind of in that Jeremiah Hunter mold, was somebody who was working with him on the second team offense and was basically his number one security blanket. When he just needed to make a quick throw, Kevin Green was the guy who was there for him time and time again. So that's a connection I'm really interested in, because, guy you mentioned very briefly is Rashid Williams, where Rashid Williams is the guy who I think about as, okay, if somebody's going to emerge kind of in the Denzel Boston-esque role, where as the number two guy this season, where he's going to have that I say Denzel Boston in terms of that breakout campaign where, it's nothing before, then all of a sudden it explodes in terms of just the numbers. That's the guy that I would look at, where he's a third-year sophomore. And this past season, he didn't necessarily get on the field very much, more so due to the guys in front of him, where we saw him be that first guy off the bench and a good majority of roles behind Giles and behind Jeremiah Hunter. So that's a guy that I look at and I'm really excited about. And I think, we're going to watch him take a big step forward during spring practice. I think that him and Demond are guys that are going to develop some chemistry together. And I think the biggest question really is going to be who's going to step up, because there's a group that I know you and I both are really high on their potential and what they might be able to do in terms of these true freshmen. But the name for me, in terms of guys that I think could really explode if he's healthy, is Justice Williams.
That is the enigma in the room. That is the one, because I was actually, it's crazy that I didn't know we were going to have this segment today, but I went back and listened to Kevin Cummings' interviews in fall camp. And one thing he said about the freshman receivers is we want to have at least one freshman every year be playing. That turned out to be Audric Harris this past season, because Justice Williams came in hurt. At 6'3", 6'4", 185,
6'4",
190.
Yeah. I thought he was closer to 200, but yeah, no, just in that ballpark.
My point is, if he's at 200, that's even better, because if that can emerge on the outside, this change that's almost like getting another 4-star transfer recruit or a 4-star addition who has college experience, even though he didn't play last year. Because you think about what some of these other acquisitions would have been that UW was considering, some redshirt freshmen, some true freshmen or sophomores. it's like we're looking at Justin Fields like, well, son of an NFL player, that seems to be the guy as long as he's able to be healthy. And we won't disclose what the injury is, because I kind of know and I'm not willing to talk about it, but I'm not concerned about it being a long-term thing. And so if we can see him in spring camp, that would be the important thing. Similarly, Ryan Otton is still on the team. If Ryan Otton is able to emerge a tight end in that similar fashion, where guys that have been hurt, you don't have to go look in the portal if you have them on the roster.
So let's talk about tight end, because tight end is a very important part of this discussion for a couple of reasons. Number one is right now at the top of that room is a sixth-year senior in Quentin Moore, who missed all of last season, obviously due to the knee injury he suffered in the season opener. And that's going to be a really important part of this, in my opinion, because it's just another veteran body for Damon Williams to throw to, where, all due respect to Quentin, you and I are big fans of his game, big fans of talking to him whenever we get the chance. He's not somebody who's going to stretch the field and be a burner for you. He's not somebody who you expect to rip off chunk play after chunk play after chunk play at the tight end position. But he's a reliable pass catcher who, over the middle of the field, somebody with as much experience as he has, can just be that reliable target for Damon Williams. When he needs to jump the ball off, it's just having another guy like that who has a little bit more college experience under his belt. And I think that's something that's important to mention, because now behind him, you have a freshman All-American in Decker DeGraaf. And you look at the way this room is coming together. You bring in Cade Eldridge, who I like the talent, I like the upside, doesn't have a lot of experience under his belt. Shout out to Lincoln Riley for that, and just not developing tight ends, but that's a different story for a different day. And I like the way that these rooms are both shaping up. But the problem is, and I understand where I've seen this a lot on Twitter, and I know you have as well, is there are a lot of question marks about the position, which is understandable, but there's a lot to be excited about as well.
Yeah, there's enough talent in the room and on the board where you don't have to go get a second transfer. You can take a Cade Eldridge, who didn't light the world on fire at USC because of the offense he was in, but project that to what UW needs, and maybe he could be a blocking tight end similar to Quentin Moore, where there's so many different aspects of the Jedd Fisch tight end in this offense, where it's not just Tanner McLaughlin running 50, 60, 70 catches. If you have that, great. Decker, I think, probably is like a 50, 60 catch kind of guy at max. But just because the way the offense is structured, that's not for a lack of his receiving ability. But one thing that I think is kind of hidden in all of this, having three tight ends, and I know we don't usually see it often, but having one as a blocker or as a delayed blocker, like you could have Quentin Moore as a delayed blocker, Cade Eldridge as a delayed blocker, instead of having Zach Henning or an offensive line, Paki Finau, as that sixth offensive lineman as a blocker, which is what the offense had to do in 2024. So I think if you can, that's going to help out Damon just as much as the receiving options. We're talking about his receiving options, but at tight end, one's going to block, one's going to go, one's going to release. And at that point, the more bodies you have, man, I'm really pulling. We don't root for certain things here, but I'm pulling for Ryan Otton to make some plays this year and be able to be healthy and be able to make, give it one more go. And at least, play in 6 games. You find a way to be healthy, because that size, the body type, it's there. The problem is, you want him to be a little more physical, and that's probably where things are going to run into a bit of a problem. But if you could add him, that's a former 4-star. So you look at the room, there's plenty of bodies and potential and talent there. And it's also not like an A1 position where you're looking at receiver thinking, hey, we need 2,000-yard receivers. Well, there's no 1,000-yard tight end aside from Tyler Warren.
Right. And, speaking of Penn State, Omari Evans would be a perfect addition to this room, which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Prize Picks. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in winnings. Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least 2 players, and if your picks hit, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. For me, I'm all about the hot takes this season. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at Lamar Jackson for more than 250 passing yards and Travis Kelce for more than 70 receiving yards. It's fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you can get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your next game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. Lars, let's talk about Omari Evans. Omari Evans, where this is a really interesting character in terms of, I don't mean that in terms of his personality. I mean that in terms of the offense that he played in, where Penn State in that ugly I don't want to say ugly. It was ugly in terms of what we on the West Coast are used to in terms of utilizing receivers in an offense. No receivers got a catch in that playoff semifinal against Notre Dame. I don't think I've ever seen that before in my life. And I say all this to say I don't want to knock his talent because that's absolutely not the case here. But it's interesting. He entered the transfer portal. He's down to 4 options. He's got Washington, Texas Tech, Syracuse, and Tennessee, where he'll be taking official visits. I'm curious to see how this is going to work out because this is, as you said on Twitter, a perfect veteran option for this room in terms of just the experience that he has.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned that because to be clear, that tweet, I want to clarify, wasn't to take away from what Denzel and Kevin Green had. I'm just saying, compared to the last receiver you took, and his lack of a veteran presence, I'm not even going to acknowledge the word because he's already gone. We're going to move on. But it's build the right program and character. And I'm glad you mentioned his character because coming from Penn State and staying there for 2, 3, 4 years as a receiver in James Franklin's offense, like that takes a special type of character as a receiver. The one, you know what it reminded me of, as you were saying all that? Ty Jones. Because if you think back to the 2019 Rose Bowl, what was one thing that did not happen the first half in that game against Ohio State? They could not pass the ball to save their, you know what. And that now, again, in the second half, Bush Hampton got it together and all those sorts of things still ended up coming up short. But in that sense, it's not that Ty was a bad receiver because he ended up having a good couple of plays at Utah and having several good plays at Washington, especially that one-handed catch that he had. Like, my God, that was incredible. But I use that example as you're going for another 1-year guy. He only has 1 year of eligibility left. We talked about last segment how many young guys you have in the room. You don't really need a 2, 3, 4 year guy. Again, if you find one, great, more power to you. But I do think for the trajectory of the room and what they have and what they want to do with the freshmen, Omari Evans would be a perfect fit because he's probably going to get 30, 40 catches, 50 catches maybe, 500, 600 yards, play in a pro-style offense. And again, this is an example of where a guy that just played in the CFP is going to want to go to a CFP contender. You look at the schools on that list, Washington is arguably in the best, aside from I think Tennessee, which is the only other
Tennessee
one
would be number 1.
Right, but I'm saying aside between Syracuse, Texas Tech, and Washington's the number 2 score. I don't think it's close.
Sure.
Now I do think I forget who's at Syracuse. Now I know Jeff Nixon's at Syracuse with his son Will Nixon, former Utah running back. But with that being said, I think that it just kind of screams like if Washington can beat out Tennessee, which we already know they lost 1 transfer target to Tennessee. So can you make right on that aspect? I would hope so. And I think, you look at the room, Jeremiah Hunter might not be the best example, but he still put up some numbers. And I think Jedd maybe learned some things about it. And,
Sure.
I think you have to go get a veteran is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And I want to expand on one point where you talk about Washington being the best situation of the schools that he's chosen. It's because of DeMond Williams. Like that's the thing with all of this. And it's interesting where let's say he goes to Tennessee or he goes somewhere else. And because we've gotten a lot of questions from our insiders and we're going to just heads up, we're going to be doing an insider exclusive mailbag on Friday. You're only going to get the link to that. If you are one of our insiders, the link to that down in the description below, free 2-week trial. After that, it's $4.99 a month. But we've gotten several questions about that. And one of the things that I think is really important to note is you don't want to bet on the spring portal. You and I have said that a couple times where you don't know what that's going to look like. But if there's one position that I'm truly just not concerned about in the world of college football as a whole, in terms of finding talent, finding guys that might fit your system, it is wide receiver. And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that, kids are playing in the 7-on-7 circuit all year long now. So they have a chance to refine their ability as route runner, doing all the things that it takes to go into playing receiver at the college level. So there's never going to be a shortage of players at the position, unlike, offensive and defensive line, where it's becoming harder and harder to find quality bodies, especially defensive tackle. So I say all that to say Omari Evans would be a great addition to this room because he fits everything you need for one season. He would be going into the right system. And I think it's great to see that DeMond Williams has become enough of a draw to get into the top 4 of a guy like this, where you look at the production and it's not stellar. It's not going to blow you away. It's like 415 yards and 5 touchdowns, something like that. Like that's not anything to write home about. It's still, obviously the production that you're looking for at the college level. And that's something that this offense really needs right now. And Damon has become the sell. And just to kind of put a bow on this, even if you do end up missing on this guy, it bodes well for your status going forward. If you do say, hey, with this Jonte Cook thing, we need to add another wide receiver. We're trying to do it now. And if we have to wait to the spring portal, that's fine. But at the same point, this is a guy that you need to find a way to close on.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's even more imperative why Jedd went the route he did with Damon this season in terms of getting him in every single game, because he knew, and we knew it from day one, the Damon's personality, where he was kind of quiet and reserved in terms of with the media, with short answers, professional, kind of not going to say anything that rifles, shakes the boat or anything like that. But you could tell he was a dynamic personality. You can tell, when we talked to recruits that came in on visits, it was, hey, Damon's a cool guy, chill guy, great guy, fun guy to be around, good dude, good teammate, a guy you would want to go play for. And we see with the offensive line where it's like, hey, I want to go block for that guy because that guy is like, he's so dynamic and so whatever. It's like, when you have the chance, and I know this is going to be some big praise, and not similarly in exactly height stature, but similar kind of style of game, Cam Newton. Like there's certain guys like, hey, I want to go block for the guy. I want the personality.
I get what you're saying.
I want to go play for that guy. I want to go block for. I would go to war for that guy. Not saying they wouldn't go to war for Will Rogers, but he has that type of personality, and so that's why you need to let it show through, and why once these kids come in on visits, have Damon be the host, and I think that's why it was so imperative that he played early, and so. It's still frustrating because I don't think people truly know Damon. Like if this was next year, I think Omari Evans would probably just transfer to Washington. It would be a lot easier, route because you would have a full season with Damon and be like, oh wow, that's what it looks like. Yeah, I would love to go because maybe Damon would, help him get to the NFL. Whereas, the offense this year, it was kind of like, hey, we're kind of just patchworking it week by week here. And in that mold, Damon is just such a valuable asset. You have to find a way to use him in any way you can. And in the same light, like that's why you're seeing all these 4-stars and FBS and CFP guys coming to want to play for Washington because of the talent that's going to be there. And now you add in Jedd Fisch as a coach and all those sorts of things. But I think even Jedd would say, this is Damon's team now.
Yeah, and that's the most important part of this is that with the way we saw him take over toward the end of the year, it was okay. Yeah. Now we're seeing the transition into what 2025 is going to be and to what Jedd had talked about all year long is, hey, we're building something. Damon is and has always been the focal point of that. And you didn't want to throw him into the fire from day one, which is understandable when you have a guy like Will Rogers, but you can still use him as a recruiting piece. We saw that work in the 2025 class. Where, you go look at the receivers that they brought in, Raiden Vinesbright, who is originally from Arizona, Desmond Roebuck from Arizona. You go talk to anybody just in and around just Arizona high school football. It was, hey, Damon Williams is a draw. People want to play with him. People want to play, whether it be 7-on-7 or just high school ball. They wanted to do that with him. And then you get to the college level, and now that we get to see him be exposed on a larger stage with the performance that he had in the Sun Bowl, all of a sudden you can maximize that. And now it's, okay, it's no longer a what if, where if we're sitting here and it's, oh yeah, we saw him at the end of a couple of blowouts and, oh, hey, we like what he's going to do. We're not having this conversation because it's an unknown, or more so of an unknown, where you and I can sit here and say, we saw him do this, and that in practice, but it's not the same conversation as seeing him do it in a game where, yeah, he took 10 sacks against Oregon, but we still saw some of the signs of life, some of the signs of a future in terms of the throws that he made. And then he just turned it up to 11 in the bowl game. So moving forward, we're going to see this be more of an interesting draw. And with somebody like Omari Evans, it's just kind of that, all right, it's good to know that that's working, that, whatever it might be, the draw of coming to play for Damon, coming to play in this offense is all starting to come together.
Exactly. And I think, it's why this year was so frustrating because Jedd's like, hey, we're building the foundation. We're doing all these sorts of things. But this is also why at the same point, okay, your foundation is laid. All the pieces are there, minus 1 or 2.
Sure.
One more lineman, one more receiver. Go get the receiver and the offensive lineman. Well, we'll figure that out at the end of the day.
Well, Lars, that being said, offensive line in the 2026 class, I don't think that's the biggest need. which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So, Lars, let me explain. Offensive line is absolutely a priority in every single class. But I look at this 2026 class and I say, might be third on my list in terms of needs, maybe even fourth, where I look at it, number one is defensive line. I look at where this class is right now, and if this defensive line class looks kind of like last year's receivers class was 4 or 5 guys deep, I personally wouldn't have any complaints. I don't think I'd be surprised. Where we talked about it a little bit on the show earlier this week, where we talked about our recruiting big boards. And we spent a lot of time talking about the 3 in-state edge rushers who are the top 3 players in the state of Washington. Obviously, that's headlined by Derek Coleman-Brusa. And I just look at that and I say, there's not a whole lot of interior defensive line talent on the West Coast right now at this point in time. There's 1, maybe 2 guys that you could say, okay, yeah, I see it with him or with that guy. But you look at the edge talent, and especially in the state of Washington, I would be hard-pressed to find a bigger need right now, just in terms of where this roster is as well.
Well, I was going to say, I completely agree with it. You could go 4 or 5 deep, and half that class should be from the state of Washington. Like, that's the bar. Like, that's where you're at. And that's also why when you talk about, well, there's not a ton of talent on the West Coast, that's cool. You got 3 in your backyard. Get 2 out of 3 of them. One of them probably won't because you got 2 teammates and 1 at Kennedy Catholic with Derek Coleman-Brusa. And so you think, okay, probably one of the ODA guys probably going to go somewhere else if they don't go to Washington. So you're going to get one of the 2. Projection, no sourcing, no nothing. Just
sure.
You get Coleman-Brusa and you get one of the 2 ODA guys. Pick one. Doesn't matter which one. Then you say, okay, cool. What else do we need there? Because you got basically 2 edges at that point. So now you can go get the interior guys outside the state of Washington, go down to, Alabama, Georgia for one guy like he did with Caleb Smith, where they laid a lot of groundwork. And so I think they're going to end up getting one guy from the South. I won't say which state or whatever, because again, it's hard to get guys from the South up to the state of Washington. But as Matt Doherty said during their signing day press conference, like, hey, you got to go to where they're at.
Yeah.
Whether they're in American Samoa or whether they're in Florida, you got to go and find them. You can't just say, hey, you know what? Well, we don't want to go do that because it takes a lot of resources. So we're going to take some undersized guys. It's like, no, you're not in the Pac-12 anymore. You have to go get the size that actually plays, not the size that you hope and pray that plays. And so with that being said, you got the state of Washington secured in terms of half that class on the defensive line. There's enough outside pieces where it's East Coast, Midwest, whatever you want to do, where you can find 2 or 3 other guys.
And that's the interesting part about it. And that's one of the reasons I want to make sure it was highlighted as number 1, in my opinion, is the fact that you need to go somewhere else to find that interior presence that you're looking for, whether it be Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, wherever it might be. And that's going to be a lot more difficult. And that's really going to show what kind of recruiting chops this staff has, because we saw them do a really, really good job in 2025 in terms of getting a lot of the top end guys, locking down Zedrius Randy-Saleh when they did, getting Dylan Robinson. I highlight some of the top names in this class where obviously they lost, 1 or 2 for varying circumstances. But you look at a lot of the top end guys in this class, and even some of the ones that you and I believe to be a little bit more underrated. And you say, okay, I understand why you took this guy or that guy, Dominic McCone, since we're talking defensive line for that example, where, okay, yeah, I understand the talent, I understand the background and why you want to go get a guy like that. And now it's on you to level that up a little bit more, because you can still absolutely take a player of that caliber, but you want to supplement that with some more high-end takes as well. So you just have some depth to fall back on the roster, as well as hey, we hope this is going to be the guy at the position. But Lars, outside of defensive line, what do you think is the next most important need for this recruiting class?
So that's where things are interesting, because right now you look at the amount of youth and redshirt freshmen and true freshmen that you're going to have on the roster. Without attrition, it's going to be a smaller class. It has to be, because you're not losing a ton of guys. Now, attrition, over the next 18 months will determine that. And so when you look at it, it's like, let's kind of just run through the quarterback, You know what? Let's go to quarterback because it's an intriguing one. It's an intriguing one because again, we talk about O-line, D-line, we talk about that a lot. I like the conversation we just had, but now we're going to go to quarterback where you have two freshmen coming in, Dash Beerley and Tristan Keeney McMillan in the 25 class, who are now both on campus, on the roster. All the sorts of things will be participating in spring ball. Damon, I think, will be a junior at that point in time. By the time Brady Smigel could sign, if Brady Smigel ends up being the quarterback for Washington, the interesting thing is Brady Smigel is clearly the number one target. Currently committed to Florida State, 5-star, high 4-star, depending on which service you look at. But they offered a couple of other quarterbacks. They offered one in Utah. They offered one. Forgot where. I don't think there was a Hawaii kid. But there was another offer they put out in 2026 quarterback for the 2026 class at quarterback. And so for me, I think that's kind of their way of saying, look, we don't really know what we're going to do at quarterback unless Brady commits, because they obviously want Brady. That's very clear. If Brady ends up sticking with Florida State or going elsewhere, then it becomes a really interesting conversation because when you look at it, it's what other – I mean, I would say running back, but you have Hanson. So, that check because Jonah's going to be gone. You have Adam Muhammad, Jordan Washington, Julian McMahon. So that would be another one that I would throw up, but you already have one committed. You're probably not taking two running backs. I could be wrong, but I don't think you are. Maybe not. But the reason why I'm kind of throwing all these out in an offensive group is to say I don't necessarily look at one key position and say they have to go address this in the 26 class. It's going to be kind of an across the board. Like you're going to have to supplement the guys that transfer out.
So I really like where you're going with that. First, to just touch on the quarterback situation, I absolutely agree when you talk about Brady Smigel, because that's just the name that I'm keeping the closest eye on in terms of when we talked about it the other day on the show, why that's such an important need for this class in just terms of gravitating around a quarterback, just making sure you have that guy secured because, we talked about the DeMond Williams effect in terms of what that would do at the wide receiver position. I think we've seen the DeMond Williams effect on just the hunt for a quarterback in the 26 class, where a lot of these guys were, in quarterback, obviously you can only have one on the field. So some of these guys really want to play early. They know they're not doing that at Washington. So it's just kind of this, maybe, a couple of these guys, they want to go elsewhere. Like Helman Kasuga from Utah, who ended up committing to Texas A&M, is a name where in that mold where I was like, this is a perfect Jedd guy, but I don't think a lot of these players want to sit behind Damon. So it's just curious to see how that one is going to play out. But I'm glad you mentioned running back because one of my favorite players in this class is Brian Bonner Jr. from Valencia High School in Southern California. And that's just a name where I wouldn't be surprised if Scotty Graham does want to take a second running back, where he's somebody who Brian Bonner put Washington in his top 10 a couple of months ago. And I watch his film and I just say, wow, like that guy is a dude who can absolutely make plays, top end back in this class. I think he's rated number 5 in the country right now by 247 Sports. I don't know if it's the biggest need, but Lars, it's what we always talk about. It's finding a way to stack talent. It's finding a way to just add on to the room no matter what the case. Where let's look at the last 2 classes for Scotty Graham at running back. In 2025, it's Julian McMahon and Quade Carr. You have a guy who is your more between the tackles runner who absolutely can get downhill, has got some speed, but doesn't have the breakaway speed of a Quade Carr. You can say the exact same thing in 2024, where we know Adam Muhammad has all the juice necessary. Everything he needs to do between the tackles, it's all there. But he doesn't have the top end speed of Adam Muhammad. And I feel like we're going to see something similar in 2026. And taking Brian Bonner to complement Ansu Sanoe just feels like a souped up version of that, if that's the route that he wants to go down. So I just say that because that's something I want to keep in mind when I talk about running backs. But for me, it's linebacker. We've seen Wassila Lobi commit already. That's a really nice take. I like that. But I look at this room and I say, all right, you have a whole bunch of guys who, if Jacob Manu redshirting him is the plan, all of these guys are going to be out of the room after next season. And we already see the succession plan. We know it's Zaytrus Rainey-Saleh. We know it's Jonathan Epperson, Donovan Robinson, and there's Devin Bryant, Hayden Moore in that room as well. But all of a sudden, you look at it, and that room is going to get really, really thin again. So I look at it, and I say, if we see another class of like 3 freshman linebackers be taken, I'm not going to be surprised. You've got one in the boat already that's a really nice talent, local kid in Wassila Lobi. But if we see a couple more at that position, I certainly wouldn't be shocked.
Oh, no. And I think the reason why you're only looking at, 1 tackle, 1 linebacker, like basically 1 player committed at a couple of positions for 6 total in 26 class is, in that same mold. And actually, kind of maybe one guy to add into this whole mix that we haven't talked about is CJ Wallace.
Yeah.
Like Grady Gross will be gone. So now you have your kicker coming in. And to be clear, because that's the one that everybody was talking about last year is, hey, you got a 5-star kicker coming in. No, you don't. You do in 26, but not in 25. And so by the time, it's all the little things. Because, CJ, he had like that SportsCenter top 10 moment, wasn't where he had the
onside kick. Yeah.
The onside kick,
also, yeah. I will say, don't forget Tyler Preston, who's coming in this year, who kicker, punter rated as both in terms of everything that you're looking at there. So that's going to be interesting, where I think that's the name that you're talking about there. But you're absolutely right with CJ Wallace. I'm sorry, continue.
Well, I was going to say, because they didn't announce Tyler as a signee, whereas I think CJ Wallace.
Yeah, he's a PWO, yeah.
Exactly. So I think CJ is would be on scholarship by Washington. And so just from that perspective. But again, yeah, it's all about stacking talent. That's why you still take Tyler in the 25 class and CJ in the 26 class, because as we saw with Grady, tired legs, man. Like, don't just, if you're kicking off and, field goal kicking and doing 30, 40, 50 yarders, it's like, that's going to start to wear on a guy. So I think Jedd might also change his approach there and have 2 kickers.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel through content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.